Hi everyone, and welcome to Choosing Love Today. When I first decided I wanted to do this podcast, there were several qualifiers I had to follow, and I told myself if I didn't, then I just needed to stop. Turn off the microphone and just go back to being retired. And those qualifiers had to do with being honest with myself and with you, and more than anyone else, with God, like He didn't already know. First, I wanted this to be done for His glory, not mine. Now, don't get me wrong. We all like a few attaboys, and every person that does a podcast looks at the numbers to see how many likes and shares they get. I'm no different. But aside from that, that's as far as I want that to go. If this podcast helps 1 or 5 people have a saving relationship with God or helps them to understand their Creator, then that's fine with me. Having 1,000, 5,000, or 100,000 followers would honestly be great, and that would mean maybe I'm doing something good. But that doesn't always determine the success one's looking for. Secondly, I'm not doing this for the money. I haven't looked into how to monetize this, and I'm not interested in how that works. Right now, all this is self-funded, and that's fine. I don't know if that will change down the road, but for now, I'm accountable to me, God, and of course, my wife. Thirdly, I'm not doing this to be popular. One thing I've learned in life is you can't please everybody, and I'm certainly not going to try and start now. My goal now is to tell the truth as I know it. I've read, I read, I study, I've prayed. I've sought counsel, and I've published what I believe to be the honest to God's truth. If at some point in time I find I've said something wrong, I have no problem coming back to you and say, hey, I was wrong, or maybe I could be wrong. I will always be as accurate as I know how to be. Some of the information you may not like. It may be truthful, but you may just not like it. The only thing I can tell you is I'm just the messenger. I can promise you if enough people listen to this podcast, there will be disagreements, and that's okay. At the end of nearly every message, I sign off with an email address where you can contact me and let me know what you want to disagree with. But let me tell you this, I will not get into some long theological debate that has no bearing on your eternal salvation. That's a complete waste of time. I don't care, and to be honest with you, I don't think God does either. Having said that, I wanted to start with the Old Testament because more people seem to talk about the New Testament, and I felt like the Old Testament wasn't getting its due credit. As I stated in a prior episode, the Old Testament pointed towards Jesus. You saw it with all the Old Testament prophecies, and they were completely fulfilled with the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and there's no reason to review those here again today. So as we get into the New Testament, consider this. People today misunderstand Jesus as badly as the people in His own day did. They wanted a Messiah who fit their expectations. We want a Messiah who fits ours. They wanted a conqueror. We want a comforter. They wanted a political savior. We're looking for a personal therapist. They wanted someone to fix Rome. We want someone to be a genie to instantly answer our prayers. But Jesus didn't come to meet our expectations. He came to the real truth. And truth doesn't always feel good at first, but it always leads to life. So let's talk about the world Jesus entered. You know, when we open the New Testament, we often jump straight to Jesus, His birth, His ministry, His miracles, His teachings, and all that's good. But if we don't understand the world He stepped into, we misunderstand the Jesus we meet, because Jesus didn't arrive in a quiet moment. He arrived in a world full of tension, confusion, division, and disappointment. A world that was spiritually hungry, spiritually tired, and spiritually misaligned. And if we're honest, Doesn't that sound a lot like how our world is today? So before we talk about what Jesus said, before we talk about what Jesus did, before we talk about how people responded to him, we need to talk about the world he entered. Because the world around him shaped the expectations people had of him. And the world around us shapes the expectations we have of him too. Before we go any farther, I want to anchor this episode in a verse that explains more than we realize. It doesn't excuse human behavior. It doesn't let anyone off the hook, but it does reveal the deeper reality behind the world Jesus entered and the world we live in today. Paul writes in Ephesians 6, verse 12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Now that verse doesn't say you're not responsible. It says the battle is deeper than you think. The visible problems, the conflict, the division, the injustice, the disappointment, those are all the symptoms, but the real battle is spiritual. And the battleground is the human heart. You see, the heart of the problem is a problem of the heart. It's like when the check engine light comes on in your car. The light isn't the problem. It's pointing to the problem. And if you ignore it long enough, the engine eventually tells the truth. The world Jesus stepped into had a lot of warning lights flashing. I think you would agree, so does ours. But the deeper issue wasn't political or cultural. It was spiritual. Again, same problem back then as it is today. And the spiritual condition shaped everything Jesus encountered. Now, life in the first century Israel wasn't easy. There were a lot of heavy expectations in this Messiah everyone was looking and praying for. Rome controlled everything: taxes, travel, trade, law, punishment. Soldiers constantly patrolled the streets. Crucifixions were public reminders of who held the power. Most people lived in poverty. Disease was very common. Life expectancy was short. Hope felt like something only wealthy people could afford. If you were poor, pretty much stayed poor. If you were sick, you stayed sick. If you were a woman, you were overlooked. If you were a child, you held no status. If you were a sinner, you were shamed. If you were an outcast, you were forgotten. And into that world, people cried out for a Messiah, not a teacher, not a healer, not a carpenter, and certainly not a man from Nazareth. They wanted a king. They wanted a warrior, a political liberator, someone who overthrow Rome for them and restore Israel's glory. They wanted a Messiah who would fix the world around them. But Jesus came to fix the world within them, and that's where the misunderstanding began. The Jews were expecting a Messiah who would fit their story. Don't we? We all want God to answer our prayers when and how we want. We want Him to fix what we want fixed. We want Him to bless what we want blessed. We want Him to remove what we want removed. We want Him to operate on our timeline, not His. And how many deals do we make for all those unanswered prayers? And the people in Jesus' day were no different. They expected a Messiah who would restore national pride, punish their enemies, reward their faithfulness, and make life fair again. But Jesus didn't come to meet expectations back then or today. He came to reveal truth. And truth rarely fits neatly into our expectations. John describes this tension perfectly in John 10, verses 10 and 11. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. They didn't recognize him because they weren't looking for the Messiah God promised. They were looking for the Messiah they preferred. And that's still true today. We sometimes imagine ancient Israel as a unified religious community, but it wasn't. It was divided into groups that disagreed on almost everything. The Pharisees, they emphasized purity, tradition, and strict obedience. The Sadducees controlled the temple and were deeply political. The Essenes withdrew from society and lived in isolation, and the Zealots believed violence was the answer. And then there were the common people, and they were caught up in the middle, exhausted and confused. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone had a theory. Everyone had a version of God that they preferred. And honestly, when you look at our world today, doesn't it feel pretty much similar? There are over 4,200 religions in the world today with thousands of Christian denominations, depending on how you define denominations, and everyone had a version of God they preferred. We have denominations and movements, we have influencers and authors, we have podcasts and YouTube theologians, we have social media prophets who speak boldly but not always biblically. There's no shortage of voices telling us who Jesus is, what he wants, and what he should be doing. Some of those voices are helpful, some are confusing, some are just loud. And in all that noise, it's easy to lose sight of the Jesus we actually meet in Scripture. Isaiah's words were as true then as they are now. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. People weren't rejecting God. They weren't rejecting a God who didn't match their expectations. That's a dangerous place to be. Jesus just didn't fit anyone's expectations. When Jesus finally stepped into the scene, he didn't look like the Messiah they imagined. He didn't gather an army. He didn't challenge Rome. He didn't take sides. He didn't affirm anyone's agenda. He didn't make life easier for the everyday person, only those he chose to heal. And he didn't play by the religious rules of the day. Instead, he did the opposite of what most people did or what he thought the Messiah would do. He healed the sick. He touched the untouchable. He welcomed the outsider. He forgave the sinner. He confronted the proud. He taught with authority. He revealed the Father. And you know what happened? Everything he did moved him more steadily towards the cross. And the people said, "This isn't the Messiah we wanted." But Jesus wasn't there to fulfill their expectations. He was there to fulfill the Father's plan. And that plan required confronting the heart, not the government. You know, pick a time frame in history and people have said, a loving God wouldn't allow suffering, or a good God wouldn't let evil exist, or if God cared, he'd fix this, or God isn't fair. God doesn't make sense. And we think these aren't modern questions? They're not. They're ancient. Your kids say the same thing about some of the same things you say and do. You know how I know that? Because I said the same thing about my parents. When I get to heaven, I got a million questions for God. Well, not really, because by then the Bible says all things will be made known. But in case something happens to slip through the cracks, I'm saving a few questions for when I get there. Anyway, the people in Jesus' day said the same things, just in different words. They looked at Rome and said, "God, why aren't you doing something?" They looked at their suffering and said, "God, where are you?" They looked at Jesus and said, "This can't be the Messiah. He's not fixing anything." But Jesus didn't come to fix Rome. He came to fix us. He didn't come to change their circumstances. He came to change their hearts. He didn't come to meet expectations. He came to reveal the Father. And that revelation was so unexpected, so different, so disruptive, that many people missed him entirely, just like today. Friend, are you hearing me? I heard this quote from Rick Warren, founding pastor of Saddleback Church, and it's really two quotes, but I want to mesh them together, and I don't think Pastor Rick would be offended. He said, "You were made by God and for God, and until you understand that, life will never make sense." And, second quote, "Sometimes trying to understand God is like an ant trying to understand the internet. I just don't have the brain capacity." So am I supposed to be spending my life here on earth trying to get my Creator, focus on that word, Creator, to do what I want? Or do I spend my years on this planet doing what He created me to do? That's a heavy question. And I don't want to just drop it right there, but let me just add one quick thought. If you had employees, how many of you liked being told by them how much they don't appreciate you or you don't do enough for them? If you're a parent and you have a team, please let me know and I'll pray for you. And they have reached that stage where they know it all and they don't want you around and you're no longer cool and they don't do what they're told, or they're in that it's not fair stage. How does that make you feel? I know exactly how you feel. I've been there. I put my parents through that. I put God through that. But that's in another episode or 2 or 3 or 4 for another day. I promise. And those will be important episodes as well. Now, the great news is the Jesus we meet is going to be better than the Jesus that we expect. This is the heart of the Gospels. Jesus didn't come to be the Messiah they wanted. He came to be the Messiah they needed. And the same is true for us. We want comfort, but what He offers is transformation. We want answers, but what He gives is truth. We want relief, but He brings deliverance. We want a God who makes life easy, but He offers a God who makes life meaningful. And if we don't understand the world Jesus entered, we'll misunderstand the Jesus we meet. So as we close this episode, let me say this gently but clearly. If the people in Jesus' day could misunderstand Him, even while standing right in front of Him, then shouldn't we assume we're immune to make the same mistake? The world around us shapes our expectations. Our experiences shape our expectations. Our disappointments shape our expectations. Our culture shapes our expectations. And if we're not careful, we'll end up following a Jesus we've only imagined instead of the Jesus who actually came. That's why episode 2 matters so much, because next time we're going to look at the Jesus we meet, not the Jesus we created in our mind. Not the Jesus we prefer, not the Jesus we assume, but the Jesus who said in John chapter 14, verse 6, "I am the way and the truth and the life." That's where we're headed next week. And our weekly memory verse, it's the one we'd spoken about as we started this week's episode. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Every day our life is being shaped by things we see on TV, the internet, social media, print media, by the things we hear at work from our work associates, colleagues, employers, water cooler chat, you get it. Wherever you are, wherever you go, from the time you get up until the time you go to bed, you are bombarded with advertising, other people's opinions, right or wrong, 24 hours a day until the day you die. Think about this for just a moment. As humans, we all need water. After about 3 or 4 days, a person will die without water. But you just can't have just any water. I can't just drink ocean water and live. I have to have a filter on my drinking water at home. The better quality of filter I have for my water, the more pure my water is. What am I saying? What is your living water? What is the filter you use for the internet, for your kids, for yourself, for your spouse? Friend, every one of us needs filters in our lives, and not just for coffee and water. We need it in our marriages, for our children, in our finances, in government, and in our churches. And we need to hold people accountable. Please write this verse down on a 3x5 card and put it as many places as you can think to put it. Maybe even send it to someone who might think you could use it. Most of the problems of this country are spiritual based. This is the main reason I believe I have been distracted from getting this podcast out sooner on a timely basis, but I will not be deterred. Let that verse shape how you see the world this week. Let us shape how you see people. Let it shape how you see Jesus. Again, thank you for spending a time with me today. My prayer is that you will walk through this week. You'll see the world around you and the world within you with clearer eyes and with a softer heart. If you'd like to ask me a question or send a comment, you can always contact me at mikem@choosinglovetoday.com. Until next time, share this message with someone you care about. And remember to keep choosing love today.